Okay, Hosea's book is divided up into a couple different sections. As we have numbered the chapters, the first three chapters give us the biographical background to this book. And we'll read those first, and those will set the scope of what the rest of the book is talking about. Because the first three chapters are where we learn whatever little bit of information we do learn about Hosea, like biographically. We don't know much about him. We don't know much about his family. But whatever we do know about them is contained in these first three chapters, and the illustrations they serve, the illustrations they provide, are meant to guide our understanding of the rest of the content of this book. Hosea, chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. Now, Uzziah and Jeroboam, as we've read about before, were both long-lived kings. Uzziah of the south, Jeroboam of the north. And they had long and prosperous. Jeroboam reigned for 41 years, I think, and Uzziah reigned for 52 years. Although Uzziah had co-regencies with both his father at the beginning of his ministry and his sons at the end of his reign. And they both were responsible for stabilizing their kingdoms and growing their kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, to their strongest point, their strongest levels that they had experienced since the split between the kingdoms after the death of Solomon in 930 BC, so 130, 40 plus years earlier. So those would have been men that would have reigned from, I think Uzziah's dates were 792 to 740 BC, and I think Jeroboam was like 783 to 742 BC or something like that. So they would have been contemporary for a long time together. And Uzziah died, and then his son Jotham and Ahaz were on the throne for the 30s and the 20s. And then Hezekiah comes in the 720s or teens and goes down even to the 680s BC. And so we don't know exactly how long into Hezekiah's reign, for example, Hosea was ministering. But because he mentions all the way down to Hezekiah, he was around for a long time and presumably was there even when Samaria fell and afterwards. He probably would have left the northern kingdom by then. He doesn't mention any king after Jeroboam, even though he obviously would have lived and ministered in the reigns of the kings after Jeroboam. He doesn't mention any of the kings after Jeroboam. And there's a couple reasons for this. I think he's going to talk about the kings, and when we read the historical books, we read about there were several kings after Jeroboam. After Jeroboam died, the kingdom destabilized very quickly. Jeroboam's son, Zechariah, was assassinated after 6 months on the throne. The guy who assassinated him, Shallum, was assassinated after a month. And we had all this palace intrigue and coup. And Hosea's going to talk about this. He's going to mention all of these assassinations and bloody upheavals and uprisals and revolts, and uprisings and revolts. He's going to mention this. And so I think Hosea is not dating his prophecy by those kings because he does not want to dignify those kings as being, worthy of being listed as part of, as reigning. Because God is not going to approve of those kings. God is going to mention in this book several times that he does not approve of Israel's kings. But I think Hosea is not listing those kings by reckoning of the counting of his ministry in order to not dignify them. Jeroboam was recognized by God. Jeroboam was a member of the house of Jehu, and Jehu was told by God to be king. He was anointed by Elisha, or by the servant of Elisha. So Jehu was a properly anointed and officially recognized king. And he was told by God that he was going to have 4 kings after him, sitting on the throne of Israel. So Jehu's house was a legitimately recognized royal house of Israel, anointed by a prophet of God, and recognized and established by God. The rest of the kings are not going to be. The kings that come after the house of Jehu are not going to be recognized by God. Anyway, so that's chapter 1, verse 1. Verse 2. When the Lord began to speak, so there's a key thing here. This is when the Lord began to speak. So he began to speak to him sometime during the reign, probably near the end of the reign of Jeroboam of Israel, which would also have been during the reign of Uzziah, because Jeroboam and Uzziah were contemporaries. This would be sometime probably in the 740s BC. Probably around the time that Amos was ministering, or maybe a little bit. Amos, we said, came along in the 750s BC. It's probably around that time, or maybe a few years later, maybe. And this is when he began to speak. So this is not throughout the substance of his entire message. This was the beginning of Hosea's ministry. And here's the first thing that Hosea was to do. So when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, take to yourself an adulterous wife, and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord." So he, Hosea, married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So he was told to marry. Now, this is a little confusing. He's told to marry a woman who is going to become, at the very least, is going to become unfaithful. It's impossible to say for certain whether or not she was faithful to begin with, or how even you define that. Remember, Gomer, the wife that Hosea marries here, is going to be used as a picture, as an example, a physical example of Israel. Hosea himself is going to be used as a physical example of God. And the children of that Gomer has are going to be used as physical examples of the children of Israel. So this is all meaningful. This is not random. These are not random assignments or random things that are happening. These are all specific images that God is communicating with. We do talk about how Israel was faithful to God when they came out of the desert. Now, we read in the actual account of that in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. It didn't stay faithful very long. Okay. But we do mention a few different times in these prophetic books about this period of faithfulness that Israel experienced when they first came out of the desert. So it could be that Gomer was faithful to Hosea at first. She didn't stay faithful. You have to remember again, this is when the Lord began to speak to Hosea. We're reading about all of this after it's happened. Hosea is recounting his ministry, I think, largely after it's done. This is the substance of his teaching after he's delivered teaching it. So he's speaking in the past tense here about something that was true, that was already 20, 30 years ago. So to me, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not she was already a prostitute or whatever when he married her, or if she became that way after he married her. I'm not really clear. So anyway, he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. That bearing him a son probably means that this is his son. The next two kids he's going to have, or that Gomer is going to have, are pretty obviously not Hosea's kids. But this first one seems to be. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu." Remember, Jeroboam was a member of the house of Jehu, for the massacre at Jezreel. "And I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." So where is the significance of the name Jezreel? Well, Jezreel means he scatters, or he sows. On the first hand, Jezreel refers to a specific location where a significant event happened that we read about in 1 Kings. This is when Jehu became king of Israel to begin with. Not 1 Kings, 2 Kings. Yeah, I'm having trouble. 2 Kings, chapter 9. This is when Jehu is anointed as the king of Israel, and he is told to eliminate the house of Ahaz, who at the time was ruling Israel. And he does so, and he eventually assassinates the kings of Israel and Judah at the same time, because they were together. They were both relatives. You know, the house of Ahab and are married with the royal family of Judah. So they were the kings of Israel and Judah were both members of the house of Ahab at this point. 2 Kings chapter 9, starting in verse 14. So Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram and all, that's the king. Now Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth Gilead, that's the city out in the east, against Hazael, king of Aram. The king Joram had returned to Jezreel, that's the location, to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him in the battle with Hazael, king of Aram. So they go on down there, and the other king is with him. The kings of Israel and Judah are together in this area. And so Jehu goes to take him out, and he does. Verse 24, Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his chariot officer, "Pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite." So this goes even back further. This goes back to the days of Ahab himself. Remember how you and I were riding together in chariots behind Ahab his father, when the Lord made this prophecy about him. Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, and I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground, declares the Lord. Now then, pick him up and throw him on the plot, in accord to the word of the Lord. And that goes back to the end of 1 Kings, when we read about Ahab and Jezebel taking this plot of land from a guy named Naboth, his vineyard. This is 1 Kings 21. And you can read about that there. The first start. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but the beginning of chapter 21 of 1 Kings says, sometime later there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. So Jezreel, in this case, has a significance of both being the location where Jehu's dynasty began, and as well as apparently where it's going to end. As well as having a significance in the meaning of God scatters. I mean, so he's going to scatter the house of Jehu. He's going to scatter Israel, and eventually he'll sow them back again. So that's the significance of that. His name, the first child born to Gomer, who apparently is legitimately Hosea's son, is going to be named Jezreel. Gomer conceived again, so this is sometime later, however long, soon after, I'm not sure, and gave birth to a daughter. Didn't give birth to his daughter. She didn't bear Hosea a daughter, she just gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo Ruhamah." Our footnote down there says, Lo Ruhamah means not loved. "For I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but by the Lord their God." This is probably referring to the Assyrians not being able to conquer Judah. Assyrians conquered Israel. They took part of it in the reign of Menahem and I think Pekah, and then they took the rest of it in the days of Hosea, the last king of Israel. That was in 722 BC. And then they did eventually march on to the rest of Judah and attack Judah, but they did not quite capture Judah. They took out a large portion of Judah. But we'll read in the Kings and Chronicles and Isaiah, during the days of Hezekiah, they didn't quite capture Judah itself. So God did deliver Judah from Assyria. He did not deliver Israel from Assyria. After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, and remember, their weaning process took longer than ours does. We wean our kids after just a few months. They would have breastfed their kids for a couple of years. After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, so this is going on for a while. Okay, so this is going on for a while. We're having kids, we're weaning the kids, she's getting pregnant again, having another kid, so this is taking place over a span of a few years. After she had weaned Lo of Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, again, not Hosea's son, pretty clearly not. The Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not mine, not my people. This was not Hosea's son. Call him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yeah, the Israelites, that's pretty blunt. That's pretty plain. You're not my people. I will not be your God. I will not be I am to you. That's what the whole I am, I will be what I will be to you. That goes back to the old I am what I am, or I am who I am name spoken to Moses in the days of Exodus. And God is now saying, I am not I am to you. I am not your God. But the very next verse says this. That's not the end of the story. Because the very next verse says this. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, now that goes back to the promise to Abraham, way, way back at the very beginning of all this. That goes back to Genesis 12. Well, actually, let's go ahead with one of the later chapters. It doesn't quite make the sand and the seashore promise in Genesis 12. But it does give him the stars in the heavens promise in Genesis 15. God took Abraham outside, Genesis 15:5, and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be. So that goes back early to the promises of Abraham, very early in the story. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited. And they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land. For great will be the day of Jezreel. And that means, in this case, it means he sows. He's going to sow them, just like he scattered them again, like he's going to scatter the seed and sow new fruit out of it. Say of your brothers, my people, and say of your sisters, my loved ones. Remember, the daughter was named not loved. The son, with the second son, was named not mine. So here they're saying to the brothers, you're mine, to your sisters, you're loved. Now God is going, actually, let's go ahead and start the video.